No one wanted the scarred mail-order bride, until the silent rancher bought her for $5 and changed her fate forever. The auction block smelled like old tobacco and shame, and Nora Gill stood on it with her chin up, even though her hands were shaking. She'd learned a long time ago that people stared at the scar before they looked at anything else. The thick, jagged line that ran from her left temple down past her cheekbone, pink and puckered like rope burn. It didn't hurt anymore, but it marked her just the same. The fire that took her family's homestead 3 years back had left her with nothing but that scar and a wagon full of grief. Now she was here, in the dusty square of a Montana town called Ridgway, waiting for someone to decide she was worth the trouble. The auctioneer was a fat man with sweat stains under his arms. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief and gestured toward her like she was livestock. "Come now, gentlemen, this one's young, strong, can cook so all them womanly things, a good Christian girl." Nora's jaw tightened. She kept her eyes on the horizon beyond the crowd, where the mountains rose up purple and distant. If she focused on that, she could pretend she wasn't standing here like a broodmare being inspected. $20, someone called out, a rancher with a beard down to his belly. Nora had seen him earlier, the way his eyes crawled over the other women. 20, I got 20, do I hear 25? Silence, the crowd shifted, boots scraping dirt, then a voice from the back, quieter, 15. Nora's gaze flicked toward the speaker. A younger man, thin-faced and nervous, he wouldn't meet her eyes. 15, come on now, boys, she's worth more than that. More silence. Nora felt the heat rising in her chest, not from the sun, but from humiliation. The other women had gone for $30, $40. One had even fetched $55, but they'd all been prettier, unscarred, easier to look at. 10, the bearded man said, sounding bored now. $10, anyone at all. Nora swallowed. She'd come all this way on a promise from the agency, a new life, a fresh start, a man who'd take her as his wife and give her a home. They hadn't mentioned this, the standing and waiting while men decided if you were worth the price of a good saddle. 5, a voice said from the left. The crowd parted slightly, and Nora saw him for the first time. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat pulled low enough that she couldn't make out much of his face. His boots were scuffed, his shirt faded blue. He didn't look at her, he looked at the auctioneer. The fat man hesitated. $5, that's. 5, the man repeated. His voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together. Well, the auctioneer glanced around, waiting for someone to counter. No one did. The crowd had already lost interest. Sold, then, to Mr. Calloway, $5. Nora's heart sank and soared at the same time. She didn't know which feeling to trust. The man, Calloway, stepped forward and handed over a few crumpled bills. He still didn't look at her, just tipped his hat to the auctioneer and turned toward a wagon hitched nearby. "Come on," he said over his shoulder. Nora climbed down from the platform, her legs unsteady. She followed him across the square, past the general store and the saloon, where a few men loitered on the porch and watched her pass. One of them whistled low. Calloway didn't react, just kept walking. The wagon was old but sturdy, the wood worn smooth by years of use. He climbed up onto the driver's seat and waited while she pulled herself up beside him. She settled onto the bench, gripping the edge to keep her balance as he flicked the reins and the horses started moving. They rode in silence for a long time. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open land, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, the sky so wide it felt like drowning. Nora glanced sideways at him, trying to read his face under the brim of his hat. He had a strong jaw, a nose that looked like it had been broken once, maybe twice. His hands on the reins were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard every day of his life. "Thank you," she said finally, because the silence was making her nervous. For buying me." He didn't respond right away, just kept his eyes on the road. Then, after what felt like forever, he said, "Didn't buy you, paid for your passage. There's a difference." Nora frowned. "What's that mean?" "Means you're free to leave if you want. I won't stop you." She stared at him. "Then why'd you pay at all?" He shrugged, a small motion that barely moved his shoulders, seemed like the right thing to do. Nora didn't know what to say to that. She looked down at her hands, at the rough fabric of her skirt, at the dust settling on her boots. The right thing to do, as if $5 could erase the shame of standing on that block. The ranch appeared on the horizon about an hour later, a low, weathered house surrounded by a few outbuildings and a barn. It wasn't much, but it looked solid, cared for. The land stretched out around it, endless and empty. Calloway pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch and climbed down without a word. Nora followed, her legs stiff from the ride. He led her inside. The house was small, just a few rooms. The main room had a stone fireplace, a table, a couple of chairs. Everything was clean but sparse, like no one had bothered to make it feel like a home. He gestured toward a door on the left. "That's your room, mine's on the right. Kitchen's through there." Nora stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how alone she was. "What do you want from me?" He finally looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw his eyes for the first time. They were gray, like storm clouds, and tired. "I don't want anything. You can stay here, help out if you want, or you can leave, up to you." "I got nowhere else to go," she said quietly. He nodded like he'd expected that. "Then stay." He walked past her toward the kitchen, leaving her standing there. Nora glanced around the room again, at the bare walls and the empty hearth, and wondered what kind of man paid $5 for a woman and then told her she could leave. The days fell into a rhythm. Calloway worked the land from sunup to sundown, fixing fences, tending the horses, hauling water from the creek. Nora watched him from the porch sometimes, the way he moved with purpose, never wasting energy. He didn't talk much, barely at all, really, but he wasn't cruel. He left her alone, gave her space, never asked for anything. She took over the cooking, started cleaning the house more thoroughly, mended his shirts when she found them torn. It gave her something to do, a way to feel useful. He never thanked her, but she noticed he ate everything she made, and once she found a basket of eggs left on the kitchen table. Fresh from the hen house, she hadn't even known he had. At night they sat on opposite sides of the room. He'd carve wood by the fireplace, making small figures, horses, birds, once a wolf. She'd sew or read from the one book she'd brought with her, a battered copy of poems she'd memorized years ago. Sometimes she'd catch him glancing at her, but he'd always look away before she could meet his eyes. 3 weeks in, a storm rolled over the mountains. Nora woke to thunder shaking the walls and rain pounding the roof like fists. She got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and padded into the main room. Calloway was already there, standing by the window, watching the lightning split the sky. "It's loud," she said, though she felt foolish saying it. "Yeah," he didn't turn around. "Should pass by morning." She moved closer, drawn by the strange comfort of his presence. They stood there together, watching the storm, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the silence didn't feel heavy. "Why'd you really buy me?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My wife died 2 years ago, fever. I buried her out by the creek." Nora's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "I didn't need another wife," he continued, his voice low. "Didn't want one, but I saw you up there and I saw how they were looking at you like you were nothing. And I thought," he stopped, shook his head, "I thought you deserved better." Nora blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to. No one deserves that." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the grief he carried like a yoke. It was in the set of his shoulders, the lines around his mouth, the way he held himself apart from everything. He'd lost someone, and he hadn't figured out how to live without her yet. "Thank you," she said, and this time she meant it. He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward his room. Nora stayed by the window, listening to the rain, and felt something shift inside her chest. The next morning, the sun came out bright and merciless. Nora went outside to hang laundry and found Calloway by the barn, fixing a broken hinge. She watched him for a moment, then walked over. "Can I help?" He glanced up, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." He studied her for a moment, then handed her a wrench. "Hold this steady." They worked together in the heat, sweat soaking through their clothes. Nora's hands weren't used to this kind of labor, and by the time they finished, her palms were blistered. Calloway saw and frowned. "You should have said something." "I'm fine." He disappeared into the barn and came back with a tin of salve. He took her hand, gently, carefully, and spread the salve over the raw skin. His touch was warm, his fingers rough but steady. Nora's breath caught. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with kindness. "There," he said, letting go, "should heal quick." "Thank you." He nodded and turned away, but not before she saw the faint color in his cheeks. That night they sat closer than usual by the fire. Nora told him about her family, about the farm she'd grown up on, about the fire that took everything. He listened without interrupting, his hands still working the piece of wood he was carving. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Me too." He looked at her then, his gray eyes soft. "You're stronger than you think." Nora's throat tightened. "I don't feel strong." "You are," he said. "You're here, aren't you?" She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and looked away. The weeks turned into months. Nora learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way the land changed with the seasons. She learned that Calloway liked his coffee black and his eggs fried hard, that he hummed when he thought no one was listening, that he left wildflowers on his wife's grave every Sunday. She also learned that he was lonelier than he let on. She saw it in the way he lingered by the door before heading out each morning, in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. He was a man who'd built walls around himself, and she understood that. She'd done the same. One evening she was sitting on the porch, mending a tear in one of his shirts, when he came up and sat beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just stared out at the horizon. "I've been thinking," he said eventually. "About what?" "About this, you being here." Nora's heart skipped. And I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. I meant what I said. You're free to go if you want." She set the shirt down and looked at him. "What if I don't want to go?" He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Why would you stay?" "Because I'm happy here," she said simply. "Because you make me feel safe. Because," she hesitated, then forced herself to say it, "because I care about you." His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. Then he looked away, his jaw tight. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." "Nora." "I'm not asking you to love me," she said quickly. "I know you still love her. I'm not trying to replace her. I just want to stay, if you'll let me." He was silent for a long time. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, he said, "I'd like that." Relief flooded through her. She reached out and took his hand, and he let her, his fingers curling around hers. They sat there as the sun dipped below the mountains, the sky turning orange and pink and gold, and Nora felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The turning point came in late autumn. A group of men rode onto the property one afternoon, rough-looking types, the kind who made their living taking what didn't belong to them. Nora was in the kitchen when she heard the horses, and she looked out the window to see Calloway standing in the yard, facing them down. She grabbed the rifle he kept by the door and ran outside. "Stay inside," Calloway said without looking at her. "No." The leader of the group, a man with a scarred lip and mean eyes, laughed. "That's your woman, Calloway." "She's got a name," Calloway said evenly. "Don't matter to me. We're here for the horses. Hand 'em over and we'll be on our way." "Not happening." The man's smile faded. "You're outnumbered." "Maybe, but I'm not backing down." Nora raised the rifle, her hands steady despite the fear roaring in her chest. "Neither am I." The men exchanged glances. The leader spat into the dirt. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first," Calloway said. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the leader yanked his reins and turned his horse around. "This ain't over." "Yeah, it is," Calloway said. "Don't come back." The men rode off, and Nora lowered the rifle, her whole body shaking. Calloway turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You could have been hurt. So could you." He stared at her, then pulled her into his arms. She felt his heart pounding against her cheek, felt the strength in the way he held her, and she knew that whatever this was between them, it was real. That night they sat by the fire, closer than ever. Calloway took her hand and looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "I don't know if I can love you the way you deserve." "I'm not asking for perfect," Nora said. "I'm just asking for real." He leaned forward and kissed her, soft and tentative, like he was afraid she'd disappear. Nora kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into that moment, the gratitude, the hope, the quiet, stubborn love that had been growing in her chest since the day he paid $5 to set her free. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "You're not nothing," he whispered. "You never were." Nora closed her eyes and let herself believe it. Spring came, and with it, wildflowers bloomed across the land. Nora planted a garden behind the house, rows of vegetables and herbs that would see them through the next winter. Calloway built her a bench on the porch, smooth and sturdy, a place to sit and watch the sun rise. One morning, she woke to find him standing by the window, holding something small in his hands. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "What is it?" He turned and held it out to her. It was a carving, a woman with her face turned toward the sky, her hair blowing in an invisible wind. The detail was exquisite, every line deliberate. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed. "It's you," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes burning. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He set the carving in her hands and cupped her face, his thumb brushing over the scar on her cheek. "You're beautiful, Nora, all of you." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and he kissed her back like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. They married in the summer, a quiet ceremony with no one but the preacher and a few neighbors. Nora wore a simple dress, and Calloway wore his best shirt, the one she'd mended a dozen times. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Calloway kissed her in front of everyone, and Nora didn't care that her scar was showing or that she'd once stood on an auction block worth only $5. She had him and he had her, and that was enough. Years later, when people asked how they met, Nora would smile and say, "He bought me for $5 and gave me the world." And Calloway would take her hand, weathered and scarred and strong, and say nothing at all, because some things didn't need words. They just were.